I know things have been tough for the Albanian people since we started back in 1980, actually 86 in Congress. Things have not gotten better, but we're still here, and where we have friends, like the people I'm going to introduce, we've got great hope. And there is great hope for the Albanian people because you're here tonight. Let me tell you what this is all about before I introduce them. This is probably the finest manifestation of what we can do as Americans. You are Albanian Americans, and some of you are Jewish Americans and other nationalities. But when it comes to America, this is sacred because we're gathered here. We're concerned about something. We came here tonight. We had other things to do. Every one of us came from some place where we could have done something else around the holidays, whether it's shopping, staying with the family. I see people from Atlantic City, took 4 hours to drive here. It's important that you're concerned, so concerned that you took the time to come here, especially on an evening where you have two great congressmen who came here to not only hear from you, and they'll hear from you first indirectly through me and Shirley, because Shirley's going to make a statement about our national cause. We know who the Albanian people are in the Balkans. We know where that 7 million nation is in the Balkans. We've been there almost all over that land mass that includes the 7 million. But we've heard from you. And we hope that you're going to be excited by what you're going to hear from Shirley, because we want Congressman Gilman and Congressman Trafficant to hear the crisis that the Albanian people face today. Now, Shirley warned me this morning, don't give my speech, Joe, don't give my speech. So I'm not going to go much further than that. But let me tell you the bottom line. The bottom line is that you are concerned, and you're making those concerns known to your representatives in the most important legislative body in the world, the United States Congress. Now, we know that your words and our words are not going to fall on deaf ears, because we know already what these two great congressmen have done for the Albanian people by their words and by their deeds. Let me now begin by introducing you to the chairman of the International Relations Committee, a fine gentleman, a man respected by all peoples for his sincerity, his fairness, his humanness, and his love for people. And when there's oppression, he's there. Give a rousing, warm applause to Congressman Ben Gilman. Great. Now, at the rallies, we'd be yelling out Gilman, but we have people living upstairs, and we don't want them to run downstairs. Now, say also a great welcome to his beautiful and charming wife, Georgia. Stand up, Georgia. And on my right, and this is not a boxing match, but with this guy it could be, because he's ready. He's ready to go. He told me, give me that mission. What do you want me to do? I'll do it. Fine. I says, relax, have a nice glass of wine. We want you to hear, because you know, when you have to give a shot, when you're in a boxing match, or if you're on a ship and you got a torpedo, you got to aim it. You got to make sure you don't waste it. So we want to be sure tonight he hears that message, because when he goes out there, we know he's going to accomplish the mission for us, but we're going to give him that message. But now say hello to another great congressman. A rousing applause for Congressman Jim Trafficant. And we have his bodyguard, Mitch Thomas. No. But he might as well be, because he's been going around with them this week. And, you know, he came yesterday with his, and I'm going to introduce her right now, his beautiful and charming wife, Tish. Stand up, Tish. And Mitch has been wonderful. He took the time yesterday to pick them up. We thought they were coming in LaGuardia. He had to go all the way out to Newark yesterday morning, but he did with your son. Thank you for doing that. Then he took them to the hotel because of your support. They're here in New York, and they're enjoying themselves. And, you know, when you're doing important things, if you can have fun at the same time, that's great. And that's what they're doing. And thank you for coming. Now, also, we have another guest, Eric Licht. Eric, stand up, the president of Coalitions for America. You know what Paul Weyrich has done. He came to Macedonia with us early on in 1991, and then Albania. Eric wants to know more about our agenda, because we need to get a concerted effort in Washington on both sides of the aisle. Democrats, Jim Traficant, as you know, is a great Democrat, and Ben Gilman's a great Republican, and we need to be sure that we get both sides of the aisle focused, and the White House too, on our issue, because it's a very complicated, complex issue that needs that kind of attention. Now, before I get too comfortable with this mic, because I feel a speech coming on, I better quit right now and introduce you to someone who in the last 3 years you've come to know, because she's intelligent, she's interested, and she's also beautiful, Ben. Thank you for that. I was about to say that. But Shirley Cloyes came into our lives about 3 or 4 years ago as a human rights activist, a publisher. At that time, she was running a publishing house, Lawrence Hill Books, and she was just about to put out a book called Yugoslavia's Ethnic Nightmare. And we convinced her that the Albanian perspective was not to be found in that book, and she held it up for 6 months. She couldn't change the book, but managed to do some things that at least position the Albanian perspective. But it's incredible, and I know she gave a big interview lately with Isa Fairizi that you'll probably see in Illyria and other Albanian papers in a few weeks. And it's amazing that I overheard one of the responses. She said, well, here I am, someone who is a political activist, human rights activist, a publisher, and before I met Joe DioGuardi, I never heard Kosovo. I didn't know where it was. I didn't know the Albanian national cause. Now she not only knows it, she believes it, and she's willing to do everything she can as the Balkan Affairs advisor of the Albanian American Civic League, and as an individual, to make this issue come alive. And that's what we have to do in America. That's why it's important that you're here. It's not enough that you know about it and your families know about it. We need to advertise what's going on. We got to get the story to where the key decision makers are, so we can make the important changes, because people are suffering. So with that, Shirley has got a wonderful statement, and I want to bring her up to give that statement before we hear from Congressman Gilman and Congressman Traficant. Shirley, let's have a round of applause for Shirley.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Is that working?
Yes.
Hello? It is. Okay, good. I'm very glad to be here tonight. I'm especially glad to be here because I believe that most of the people in this room are united by a belief in the truth in the Albanian national cause and the need to reassert it in our time. I believe that most of you know that the Albanian national cause was really first raised not that long ago. It was only in the middle of the 19th century as a call to unification and independence in response to the incredible oppression that Albanians were suffering under the Ottoman Empire. And today, certainly at the end of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire is no more, but in its place is a strategy at work in the Balkans, one that has been growing since World War I in Europe, that has been built on the planned disintegration and assimilation of the Albanian nation at the hands of hostile Slavic regimes. We all know that now. We have seen this historically, first in the forced resettlements of thousands of Albanians from Macedonia into Turkey in the 1920s and 30s. We saw this in the 50-year partnership between the communist regime of Enver Hoxha and the communists in Belgrade. This partnership was so complete that literally the very existence of Kosovo was kept out of the public schools in Albania so that no one would know. We've seen this certainly in Kosovo, where Slobodan Milosevic stripped Albanians of all human and civil rights in 1989 as the first flashpoint in the Balkan War that ultimately he was to wage in Bosnia. We've seen the planned destruction of the Albanian people in a piece of southern Serbia that we hear very little about, in Preševa, in Medveđa, in Banja Nos, where approximately 100,000 Albanians today are being assimilated. And we've seen this in Montenegro, a part of the Serbian state that actually has recently received, I think, a little bit of hope with the election of Prime Minister Milo Đukanović, but where for years, and all Albanian Americans know this, Albanians have been forced to replace the AJ at the end of their names, their surnames, with the Slavic IC. Today we know that the Albanian nation is daily under siege, that the destruction continues apace. We saw this in the 1995 police assault against the University of Titova. We saw it again this summer in 1997 in the attack on the city of Gostivar, in which, as you know, peaceful demonstrators were killed, arrested, and tortured. We are seeing this now as we speak in Pristina, where students are demonstrating because the illegal occupation, and I think we should call it that, the illegal occupation, now in its 9th year, has left all but a privileged few without adequate food, housing, shelter, with no employment, with no prospects for a future, and under constant threat of arrest, torture, and even death. That's 9 years. We see this now also in the reemergence of the former communist regime in Albania. Although they call themselves socialist, we know that the new government has already distanced itself from the national cause. Witness only the meetings between current Prime Minister Fatos Nano and Slobodan Milosevic, supposedly on the topic of Kosovo, and yet without the participation of any of Kosovo's leaders, with Nano's rejection of independence for Kosovo, and with his government's rejection of the aspirations of Albanians in Macedonia for human rights, self-determination, and education in the Albanian language. And we also see this in Montenegro, where the newly elected prime minister is the object of threats from Milosevic because he reached out to the Albanian population there. And sadly, finally, we see the role of the United States and the Western press in this scenario. The United States, with its failed foreign policy in the Balkans, which from the beginning has tried to settle the Balkan conflict on the backs of the Albanian people by concealing the very history that I've just referred to briefly, and by excluding Albanians from the negotiating tables in Dayton and elsewhere, even though there's 7 million Albanians in the region. The press, meanwhile, and I couldn't say enough about it, but very briefly, we know, reports accounts of violence regularly in Pristina by, quote, the ethnic Albanian separatists, without ever mentioning the fact that the 92% Albanian majority there is under Serbian occupation. The pattern of planned destruction of the Albanian nation, I think we have to call it that, has certainly convinced the Albanian American Civic League that the only way out of the crisis is to work for a national solution so that the real issue of genocide, both real, actual genocide and cultural genocide, is not concealed. In the months ahead, we plan to be working with many international bodies, especially the United Nations, to try to convince the international community that the Albanian issue is not a matter of isolated skirmishes in Titova, in Pristina, in Gostivar, in Tirana, which is what Europe, much of Europe anyway, would like us to think, but is a matter of national survival. And frankly, that's why we're so delighted to have Congressman Gilman and Traficant here today with us and to honor them, because both men will always be remembered, certainly by the Albanian community and I believe by many others, for having had the courage when others did not, to stand up for the Albanian quest for national self-determination. We are involved in nothing less than a daily life and death struggle for the survival of a nation, and your presence here today and support of the Albanian American Civic League and its Political Action Committee is not only greatly appreciated, but it really represents another step toward Albanian freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you very much for those very cogent remarks. I hope the reporters are here. Are you there, Isuf and Sue? We need to get those messages out. I know you've done it in so many ways, but sometimes a new perspective is important. With that, let me bring Ben Gilman to the podium. Ben has been with us right from the beginning. Why is he with us? Ben is with us because he knows our cause is right. He understands that the oppression that is in the Balkans today on the backs of the Albanian people is not too different than the oppression that he witnessed, at least indirectly, in World War II with the Nazi regimes or the Nazi regime. Nothing can ever compare to the Holocaust, and we're not saying that the Albanians have adopted that word, but we have something that, to a degree, is similar, Ben, because there is a planned movement to somehow keep the Albanian people in the Balkans as second-class citizens, and maybe in the future then to just see them go away because their intellectual class will be eliminated because there'd be no education, not in Pristina and not in Titova. Now, you remember it was Ben Gilman who we went to when we came back, Tom Lantos and I, from Albania in 1990, when Ramiz Alia, trying to patronize a Jewish congressman, Tom Lantos, gave him a file. And in this file were stories that no one had ever heard of, the heroes of the Albanian people who saved every Jew that made it to Albania in World War II. I sent all this to Yad Vashem, gave copies to Congressman Gilman and his staff, and we waited about 2 years until Yad Vashem, this is the Museum of the Holocaust in Jerusalem, confirmed that it was an actual fact that every Jew in Albania, the Jewish community there was about a couple of thousand, and every Jew that made it to Albania survived the Holocaust. No other nation in Europe could say this, and today the names of dozens of Albanians are not only at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, they're here in the U.S. Memorial Holocaust Museum, and it was Ben Gilman that interceded with the chairman of that museum to be sure that this was memorialized, because we were shocked one year when we went in 1993 with Dr. Rogova after he came here and he took that picture with Bill Clinton. The Albanian American Civic League had a lot to do with that trip. We figured what a wonderful thing it would be if we could bring Ibrahim Rogova to the National Memorial of the Holocaust because of what he represented and who he was. And here we go in there and we're looking at all the nations listed, and there's Yugoslavia, but no Albania. And we were just at the end of the research, and I gave it right away to Ben Gilman. He gave it right away to the museum people, and they corrected it within, I think, several months. And it was Ben Gilman who then hosted a ceremony specifically for the Albanian people so that their name would be there, the righteous among nations and the righteous among Gentiles. And you saw the letter that he and Congressman Traficant just sent to other members of Congress and every Jewish member of Congress. And we did our research with them. 10 senators, 26 House members got personal letters in their first names from them with the book, Rescue in Albania, with the Israeli flag on it and the Albanian flag. So we are beginning, I shouldn't say beginning, I think that we are telling our story in a much more focused way. I know we've been telling our story before, so I'm not going to say it's a beginning. But we got to keep doing this to educate the world about who the Albanian people are, who never invaded anybody, who never victimized anybody, who risked their lives to save people under the worst oppression. And that's why Ben Gilman is here, and that's why Jim Traficant's here. But let's hear now from Ben Gilman. He was with us in the beginning, and he's always with us. God bless you, Ben.
Joe, with an introduction like that, I ought to just sit down and say thank you. It's so good being, Georgia and I welcome the opportunity of being here in this wonderful restaurant. Let's hear it for our good host, Sasha. And I know we'll be back soon again with all of that good food. And so good being with our good colleague, Jim Traficant, and his wife, Tricia. And I hope that you're showing them all of the best of New York. It's not often we can get the Midwest to come east. And I want you to know he's a stellar warrior on the floor of the House. When Jim gets up, we all listen. A great orator. And so good, too, to have Eric here representing the coalition and the good work that they do. And we'll take advantage of your invitation to be joining with you in the days ahead. And I'd like to introduce a special guest who came all the way from Los Angeles to be with us, Howard Winkler, who is a drug commissioner in Los Angeles. Howard, say hello. Howard's a good supporter of Joe in days gone by. Joe's got friends all over the place, as you know, and Howard's joined by his good son. And Mr. Winkler, would you stand up as well? Jim Traficant and I were pleased to circulate a letter and circulate books on the rescue in Albania by Harvey Sarner, a book that has to be made has to have more distribution and made known of throughout our land of what Albania did. And I was pleased that Joe brought this to my attention a few years ago, and we brought it to the attention of the Holocaust Museum. And today Albania is amongst those nations who are listed as the righteous nations in the world for the wonderful things they did in saving so many thousands of people during that horrible period of the Holocaust. I can't tell you how much I welcome seeing all of you from such distant places, and I'm so pleased that Dr. Colucci is down here from my own constituency. Doctor, and I have a few more friends from our 20th Congressional District. How about standing up, our constituents here? So, Joe, your influence is far-reaching, but we all know Joe and Shirley's good work, and Shirley, that was a good, comprehensive review of what's been happening, and we ought to give more of our colleagues that kind of a briefing in the Congress. And, Joe, I hope you'll make arrangements to come down. I know Jim and I will be pleased to help you with those arrangements in the days ahead, but too few of our colleagues in the Congress even know where Albania is located, let alone Kosovo and Macedonia, and too few of them take the time to go traveling around to take a look and see what's going on out there in the world. We need to encourage them to do that. We need to encourage them to recognize the volatile situation there. Remember, this is where World War I and World War II had its origins in these areas, and we must not neglect it. And it is volatile. Some of it is seeping over at the edges right now and could cause another outbreak of hostility. In early October, in response to the police brutality against the students, protesters in Pristina, I wrote to Secretary of State Albright, I think Jim joined with me in that, requesting that she raise with Milosevic our concerns at the continued denial of educational opportunities in Kosovo's majority Albanian-speaking citizenry, and remind them there would be serious consequences should violence escalate out of control in Serbian repression in Kosovo. And we also remind any of our parliamentarians who come over and officials who are visiting with us of the intensity of this problem and the necessity to do something about it, not just talk about it. Mrs. Albright responded that indeed our government was in contact with Milosevic and other Serb authorities about Kosovo, and that we would be continuing to block release of the so-called outer wall of sanctions in Serbia until the problems of Kosovo had been addressed to our satisfaction. So we have that assurance, and we want to make certain that that assurance is going to be lived by in the days ahead. State Department is also working with European governments to maintain a united front, and you know how difficult that is with our European allies. A united front on any issue is so difficult these days. Take the problems today with Iraq of trying to gather together some support to address that threat. So we are informed that for the first time, Kosovo was brought up at a recent meeting of the 5-nation contact group, and that includes our own nation, includes France, the UK, Germany, and Russia on the former Yugoslavia, and was also discussed at the US-EU summit meeting as recent as December 5th. We, together with our friends in Europe, are convinced that the status quo in Kosovo must not be permitted to continue without risking an outbreak of serious civil unrest and instability. And we're urging Serbia and the representatives of the Kosovars to engage in a dialogue that would be aimed at restoring the legitimate rights of Kosovo's sovereignty. I understand that many of you believe that the time for such a dialogue has come and gone, and that your patience with the Serbian obstructionism is at an end. I would, however, counsel some realism on everyone's part, as we've already done during the decade. We witnessed the tragic consequences of trying to redraw the international borders of that part of former Yugoslavia. Independence for Kosovo is not an option that can be accomplished without massive violence in the near term, and can only be achieved in a longer term peacefully and through negotiation. And we have to focus on our leverage over Serbia to regain some measure of human rights for the people of Kosovo. I think that our leverage is considerable, as the economy of Serbia today is in a deplorable situation, and Milosevic needs access to international economic assistance if he's going to try to correct his own problems. The Serbian people have already, in the recently held elections in Serbia, demonstrated their own impatience with Milosevic, and he recognizes a need to do something to shore up his own political position. I will continue to urge our Secretary, our Department of State, to make certain that Kosovo remains a priority issue in our dealings with Milosevic in Serbia, and I know Jim Traficant will be joining in that battle. In Albania, we're concerned with many of the measures of the new government led by the former communist Fatos Dano that seem to be aimed at undermining the democratic reforms put in place by former President Berisha. In particular, we are most concerned about the purges of individuals who had bona fide credentials as democratic reformers from educational institutions and the military, and their replacement by members of the former HOA regime. The replacement of competent educators and military officers with former Communist Party hacks cannot help Albania progress economically or socially, and we must communicate our critical opinions in that regard to Albania's present leadership. We had an opportunity to meet with the new president, President Nano, and we let him know firsthand about our feelings with regard to his not paying attention to what's happening to the government, that it's moving back to a communist regime. And when we met with Mr. Nano a few months ago, we asked him about his relations with the Democratic Party in Albania and reminded him that in true democracies, the legitimate rights of opposition parties must be respected. Recent violence and threats of violence directed at members of the opposition in Albania cannot be tolerated. Those responsible for such acts as the shooting of MP Hidari on the floor of the parliament should be subject to a full measure of justice, and we called upon President Nano to heed that. I will continue to monitor developments in Albania along with my colleagues and take measures to make certain that our government will provide assistance to the Albanian government only to the extent that its policies are truly aimed at fostering democratic institutions and a democratic way of life and a free market, something that Mr. Trafficante continually reminds us about in the Congress. I hope that you'll use your influence with your representatives in Congress. Some of you are from distant places, and I hope that you'll ask your own representatives to focus attention on this problem and to help them with their homework so that they understand these problems. We need some support for our efforts. I also urge you to make your views known to the representatives of the Albanian government in the embassy in Washington and at the Albanian mission to the UN here in New York, close at hand. Assistance from our nation is vital for Albania. For its representatives will have to take your views into consideration because of your influence over our own decision-making. So don't be shy and use it. Ruft Kosova.
Come on, get up. That was a wonderful summary, wasn't it? I mean, he really understands our issue. His staff understands our issue. He's in such an important position with the Republican Congress, the Republicans today controlling both houses. That's why it's so important to be here to support good people, great people like Ben Gilman. And thank you again, Ben. That was excellent. Before I go further, Agim Karadzios is here. We have an organization called Vatra, which is the oldest Albanian American organization. And in fact, it was started, I guess, back in Boston in the early part of this century. Agim, come over here and join us. Where are you? I know you're out there someplace. Yes. And there are many... There are many members of Vatra here, and we deeply appreciate that, and so does Ben Gilman and Jim Trafficant and Eric. Sit here. Yeah. With that, let us now meet the other side of the aisle, Jim Trafficant. I came to Congress with Jim in 1984 and got to know him very well. Jim and I became friends immediately. Who could not become a friend of Jim Trafficant? He's just warm, he's outgoing, he's funny, and we got to know each other well. And he was on one side of the aisle, I was on the other. In those days, I wanted to know a Democrat because the Democrats controlled Congress. I was a junior member of the minority party, so it was nice to know somebody that was in charge, so to speak. And since he had a loud mouth, even though he was a junior, he got a lot of respect from the senior Democrat congressman. So when I had a resolution for Kosovo, I would run right over to Jim because I knew somehow he would bring it to the important Democrats and we would get that passed with his help and with Ben Gilman's help. And that's what we did for 4 years. We got a lot of resolutions in there. I went around myself, like the staff would do, on the floor of Congress to get them to sign it, and Jim would go up and make a speech, and Ben would go up, and we'd get some action. Well, they're with us again. Things haven't changed for us. In fact, in a sense, they may have gotten a little worse because of the problems that we've seen now with the Bosnian War and how Milosevic has gotten away literally with murder, and now the problems that we're seeing in Albania. So we need that loud mouth once again. But now he doesn't have the power he had before. Now the power has shifted in Congress to the other side. That's why it's so important that we have Ben Gilman here, and it's so important that they get along and they talk, because then he's able to get Ben to join with him when he says something has to be done. I said, well, don't do it yourself. Let's call Ben and his staff. Let's see if the two of you can put it in. Now, this is lobbying at its highest, and that's what our Civic League is all about, and that's what your support is all about. So with that, now that I gave you my little civics lesson 101, let's give a rousing applause to Jim Trafficant.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here with you. Such a beautiful restaurant. These veal chops were the best I've ever had such here, as Mr. Gilman had pointed out. I'm glad to introduce my wife, Tish. You normally see me by myself, my big mouth. My wife, Tish. I'm just a member of Congress, just a regular member. You have in your midst, let me say this to you, because I don't know if you really understand this. Now, I do not run for office in New York, and I'm proud to visit New York. And I've known a lot of members of Congress, and I've never cast a vote because it was Democrat or Republican. I cast a vote because I think it's best for the country. But for those of you here from New York, you are absolutely blessed tonight to have the most powerful individual voice in all of America seated at this table in Ben Gilman. He's a very... This is a very humble man, and I tell you this because there would have been nothing gained, no venture successful, unless his fingerprints had been on it. And this man has done all he could, not just for ethnic Albanians, but for people throughout all of the world who have been afflicted with oppression and where their rights have been challenged and threatened. And that's probably the most important thing that has happened tonight at this gathering, that Mr. Gilman is here. Mr. Gilman and I do not know all of the problems as well as you do. You have, without a doubt, an individual more versed than anyone in the world who brings those issues to us in an intelligible manner, and that is Joe DioGuardi. And Joe, I want to thank you. You know, I just personally love Joe, and I'm sure Ben Gilman does as well. We really do. He was a great member. We miss him. He served well. But when he brings the passion of the problems of the Balkans to the Congress not only listens, the Congress legislates, and the Congress contemplates specific policy. And they do so with the people who could make those changes. That's why it's so important, I think, this evening that Ben Gilman is here. And Ben, I just want to say this. Number one, thank you for helping me with my IRS legislation. Thank you for helping me with the resolution to ensure free and fair elections. Free and fair elections in the Balkans. And even though we do not like at this particular point, perhaps, the direction those elections have taken, let the electorate speak. But let's make sure that Nano understands one thing, that we do not want to see the old communist regime and the henchmen back dictating policy. I will tell you something. I will tell you something, that Ben has already talked with the Secretary of State. He has already had the kind of political buzzwords that are necessary to begin the monitoring of that process. And I know that he is looking in that direction. As the chairman just cannot, in all directions, stamp a policy. Because then everybody will say, the chairman has become so powerful, he doesn't let others participate. And that's not the way he governs. So it's very important that he understands it and that other members can bring forth those problems so he could distill and digest through all of those problems and develop policy. He's doing that. I think the most important thing that I could offer here this evening as a member of Congress is this: the most powerful members of the Congress understand your plight, understand the Balkans, and they're prepared to take action. They're watching carefully. They're monitoring the action of the policymakers in that part of the world. And they are prepared to legislate that which is possible. I think the most important term that was used tonight was used by Joe when he talked about hope. And you know, when you listen to the chronology of events, and I don't think anybody brings it forth more clearly and concisely in short terms, understandable, than Shirley does. And Shirley and Joe have done that. I understand it better. I'm one of 435. Ben is without a doubt an expert on international affairs. But there are other members now that must be made aware of the crises, the importance, the need to energize policy, the need to ensure fairness. That is now our goal. I talked earlier with Yusuf Irisi. Where's Yusuf? He's over there taking pictures. And I talked with Mitch Thomas. What I want from you, good doctor, as well, I want to know that which is needed, that which can be done, and then myself and others who are interested in this matter can present those issues to Ben, and we must accept Ben's leadership because he must decide at the highest levels what is doable. And that's about where we are. I believe the key word that Joe talked about is hope. The message I want to leave with you tonight: do not despair. Nothing happens overnight. What it appears to be failing experiences are nothing more than episodes towards a possible successful solution. This is not going to be a walk in the park. This is a struggle. And hopefully that struggle will be one of diplomacy, one where men like Gilman, where our State Department will sit down, promulgate a plan which is doable and that will mitigate the potential of violence and killing. I don't know about Ben, but we're all very concerned that the Balkans turn out to be something more and end up being a disaster like Bosnia as well. We can't have that. I want to commend you, Ben. I want to thank you. When I came to Ben Gilman relative to free and open elections in Albania, Ben Gilman didn't hesitate. He said, Jim, I'll talk to the speaker and I will get it scheduled. That was at approximately 7:00 p.m. in the evening, Joe, and at 10 o'clock that night, 3 hours later, the Congress of the United States of America passed a resolution by Ben Gilman letting it be known that we expect free and fair elections. And I think that's the merit of where we are. So I also want to let you know, Ben, that once I was in the gift shop and I ran into your beautiful wife, and she said, look, Big Mouth, I know you're outspoken, but you better support my husband, Ben Gilman. I said, Ben Gilman, I support him anyway. She said, good. So I want to tell you, Georgia, I'm proud to be here with you. We love you, and we're very proud of your chairman. With that, let me just say this to you. Yusuf, Mitch, each and every one of you, let us know what your concerns are. You have, without a doubt, and this is a word that's become tarnished, but it is the word that is of energy that keeps our government afloat. The word is lobby. There is not a more successful team of lobbyists on the Balkans, specifically the issue of ethnic Albanians, than Joe and Shirley, and I want to say that. That's the way it is. So really, I'm just the son of a truck driver. I'm very proud recently to have passed in the IRS bill something very important in America, to make sure if you go to court, in the tax court, the burden of proof is not on you, it's on the government. Now, I want to continue to bring forward, along with other members, those issues that affect you, and I'll take them to the chairman. And let me just say one thing. Each and every one of you, basically many of you from this region, Not all of you will vote in that district of Ben Gilman. But I am going to make a statement here tonight. I want you to contact your friends and neighbors and associates in that district. It is important that our chairman have one of the most powerful votes in the Congress. He's been a friend to all people. He deserves that kind of support. That's what I ask of you tonight. So Howard, you and your son David, thank you for the good job you're doing out there, and thank you very much, and have a good holiday season. Thank you very much.
Just a few words from Eric Lick to tell you about the Coalitions for America. They are another Civic League kind of organization, a 501c4, very effective. They carry a lot of weight, especially with the Republicans who control the House of Representatives and the Senate right now. And I work closely with Eric. Many of you have supported him, and I just wanted him to say a few words, and because he's now going to try to do something special in terms of a new strategy in Washington, especially on the Kosovo issue.
Thank you very much for letting me join you tonight in this great cause. I really appreciate being here tonight, and I just wanted to say that we have an organization in Washington called Coalitions for America. And what does this mean to the Albanian cause? What it means is that we have a lunch, a congressional strategy lunch every week with Congressman Tom DeLay and Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma. So every week we have joint House-Senate communication. And I'm pledging to you tonight, we have this lunch every week that Congress is in session. And what I'm saying to you tonight is the Albanian cause, the Kosovo cause, is going to come to the front of the agenda at our lunches. And I invite Congressman Gilman and Congressman Traficant to work together in a coalition to move this cause forward. I invite everyone here, whenever you have the opportunity to come to Washington on a Wednesday at noon, your voice will be heard. I look forward to working with you all. A coalition is the way to achieve victory. You have Republicans, Democrats, and you have the key guy here, Joe DioGuardi. He is my boss. He is on my board of directors, and we will make this a priority of our organization. So the idea is, as Congressman Traficant said, we've got to get other congressmen, we've got to bring it to their attention, we've got to raise their consciousness on this issue and broaden this beyond this room. And I leave here tonight and let you know when you go home tonight that I'm there in Washington every day, and you can have my phone number, and that we will continue that cause every day after this dinner tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you. Little by little, you know, I think we can get back to that big table that we had. We need to come back to that big table. You heard what Congressman Traficant said and what Congressman Gilman said. If you want to be understood, if you want to be heard, especially on a complicated issue this way, our issue, you have to be together. There is no way that you will resolve the Albanian national cause in Washington, and that's the only place I believe it can be resolved without bloodshed, without us all coming together, speaking with one loud voice. We've seen it with the other successful lobbies. We saw it with us. Look what we did for Kosovo. It was our league that internationalized Kosovo. Nobody knew in Congress Kosovo, except maybe Congressman Broomfield and a couple of others in the 80s, 85, 6, 7, and 8. Until our league came together and you came down to Washington and we passed those resolutions and we had those rallies and those hearings, and Kosovo kept going higher and higher to the point where Milosevic didn't dare do in Kosovo what he did in Croatia and he did in Slovenia and he did in Bosnia, at least not attack it in war. He's done it another way. He's done it very quietly, but believe me, If Bob Dole didn't go to Kosovo in August 1990 with 6 senators, and if we didn't have Ben Gilman watching and Jim Trafficant and the others, you can be sure the first place that Slobodan Milosevic would have gone was Kosovo, because that's where he formed his political power. That's where he did, on the reputations and the bodies of the Albanian people there. And he wanted to feed more of that blood to the Serbian political machine, but we didn't let him do it. But we haven't finished the job. We only started it. It's now in a checkmate, a stalemate. He can't move anymore, but he doesn't want to back off. How are we going to get him now to back off? This is our issue. Only way we're going to do it is to make that table bigger, so that the next time we have 2 congressmen together, there's 500 people like we used to have, or 1,000 people, and then you'll see the respect we have in Washington. Because that's the kind of respect that works. People, support. That's the American way. And before you leave here tonight, if you still have a little more shekels in your pocket, I want you to write another check like you used to, because it's important. After hearing those great speeches tonight, and Eric, and the coalitions need support too, if you got some extra money that you don't need for Christmas presents and things like that, please, at the door, leave another check. If you want to write it out to Ben Gilman, write it out, Friends for Ben Gilman. If you want to write it out to Jim Trafficant, Friends for Jim Trafficant, or Coalition for America. Do it any way you want, but show them that you appreciate what they did by being here tonight and by what they're going to do in the future. Okay? Let's hear it for them.